Okay, picking up where we left off on page 391, we're talking about how the operating system kind of abstracts the whole network LAN for me so that it just makes it look like a drive letter. And yeah, the permissions are a little different, and I would have to have an administrator to go in and grant me permission on things. You know, I don't have that issue with files on my own machine, but if I'm sharing this with an entire company, well, somebody somewhere is going to grant me permission to either read or write or both. And so that's the only real extra step, is some admin somewhere has granted permission to see these guys. Okay, so let's talk about exactly how that part works. On page 392, they're talking about one of the functions of an operating system is to authenticate who you are, and then to provide authorization to perform some task. Now, a lot of people get these two terms kind of confused. There are clearly separate things. Authentication is, who are you? Okay, that's the first thing. So typically that's done with a login session. Now, if you have a machine at home or you have a small tablet, a lot of people just disregard that and said they have it so the machine, first turns on, it automatically logs you in, and so there was actually a login that took place, but it just did it for you. Now, if you just got a small machine or you're at home by yourself, that's perfectly okay. On the other hand, if you have a bunch of kids, perhaps you want to have the mom and dad account, and then you want to have the kids account so you can kind of treat things differently. And I don't want the kids messing with my files, that kind of stuff. So it might make sense to have multiple accounts. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily have to have passwords in there to do that, but you have to have some ways of telling. The machine could tell apart whether or not you're a mom and dad kind of person or if you're a kid kind of person. So this authentication step is kind of sort of important. Now, once you've been authenticated, then the system says what you have or have not permission to. So in the previous example, when I was looking at a network share, do I have permission on this particular file? Okay, well, I'm going to go and look at the properties on this guy, and I can't see the properties on this file. Okay, I don't have permissions on this file to actually be able to see its permissions. Isn't that kind of crazy? Yes, I have to have permissions to be able to see permissions. Weird, huh? Okay. So bottom line is, some administrator has to set up permissions on this in order for it all to make sense. And so the difference between the two terms, authentication is who you are, and authorization is what you have permissions to do. So I need both. One without the other is not going to work. One is, who are you? Now that I know who you are, what are you authorized to do? You're authorized to read this file, or edit this file, or delete this file. Those kinds of things. Okay, so we're ready to change the subject. On page 393, they talk about the types of operating systems that are out there. And so we're going to go through this little list, but they basically separate into categories. A desktop category, which could include tablets of some sort. Server category, and mobile. Alright, so let's just kind of go through the list. So, they talk about, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, one of the newer desktop Windows versions that are out there from Microsoft. And it's specifically designed, of course, for a desktop environment. It has been tweaked to work very well in a touch environment. And so a lot of people who have brand new tablets are going to Windows 8. If you don't have a touch-capable machine, you might want to stay at Windows 7 for a while. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Windows 7. It's just Windows 8 was specifically designed for a touch interface. Now, Windows 8 does provide an awful lot of cool features, and it's probably more secure, and it's got some really cool stuff, and it's more efficient, and lots of reasons. But if you're kind of happy with where you're at, stick with what you're at. Sooner or later you're going to have to upgrade, but perhaps there's no immediate incentive. Let me just go through some of the things they're talking about in Windows 8. It talks about start screen interface with tiles. Instead of having this menu here of how to get to things, you get a similar construct, and then poof, you have an entire full screen of tiles that you click on. It includes support for touch, mouse, and keyboard. It's got email and calendar and browsers and photos and all these things. Enhanced security, and it has the Microsoft Store. And so one of the reasons why Microsoft went the way they did is that in the Windows 7 world, if I was to go get a piece of software, I would buy a piece of software off the internet or on a store and come home and install it in my machine. Microsoft gets zip, not a dime out of that transaction. Okay? There's no fee associated with it. So if I go to a electronics store and buy a copy of McAfee antivirus and it costs me $40, none of that $40 goes to Microsoft. Okay, so contrast that with the Microsoft Store concept, where I go to the Microsoft Store and I go, "Ooh, cool! Look, a little cool game. Let's click on that." And so I want to play, Parcheesi or something, and so I get the internet version of a game, and it costs me $2. Microsoft gets a cut, not a very big cut, but they actually get a cut of that transaction. So it's in their best interest to have you buy applications through their store. It makes economic sense for them. It does not make economic sense for them for you to go to a big box store and buy a product and take it home, because they get nothing. So I'm not trying to be cynical, but I'm just saying Microsoft is looking at it from an economic point of view, that they want you to be using the new modern apps because they get a cut. Okay, let's continue. On page 395, you talk about Mac OS, OS X. It's been around a while. It's very mature. People love it. I mean, this is more like talking religion and politics. I mean, people who absolutely love the Mac products, and people who love the Windows products, and people who love Linux, and you put them all in the same room. It's like throwing a hand grenade in there. If the topic comes up about what's the best operating system, so a lot of it is just personal preferences and what you're used to. If you grew up in one world, well then, stick with that. It's not really that big of a deal. On page 397, they talk about Unix. Unix has been around for a long time, 70s, and it was all command line at the time, no graphical at the time, and great product. Lots of still being used today in big iron. That's a term used for big servers. A spin-off of that was Linux. Some poor guy in Europe decided to make a cheap knockoff clone of Unix. He called it Linux. Very powerful, costs you nothing, and provides practically everything you need. You can run your entire desktop on your machine at home running Linux. It works. The only problem you may ever find is, someone comes up to you and go, "Hey, wow, have you tried this new such and such game?" And you're going to say, "No, I'm running Linux." That's the only thing is, the most popular operating system is the one that's going to be supported the most. That's the only real issue. Chrome OS is kind of the new guy, and it's typically not used in big stuff. It's usually these little netbooks, and there's a Chromebook and a Chrome box, and these things are very lightweight, very low power, and they're designed to work in conjunction with the internet. So, for example, a typical Chromebook netbook, laptop-looking device, has practically no storage whatsoever. Right? If I'm writing a letter to Grandma using, Microsoft Word equivalent, I'm not going to be storing it on my machine. I'm going to be storing it on the cloud, because I ain't got no storage on the machine. So it was really, really designed for a full connected kind of environment. And admittedly, that's not an unreasonable assumption. I mean, every place I go, there's an internet connection somewhere. So Chrome OS, kind of the new guy. Okay. Turning the page, 399, they talk about the server stuff. And we're just going to go through the list. I mean, Microsoft Server, there's a Windows Server, 2012 Release 2. There's lots of other types of server versions out there. Mac OS Server, Linux and Unix, again, perfect for server environments. And I'm not going to go into that much details. But these are all the operating systems that were designed for multi-user, so that they didn't really spend that much time and energy on doing the user interface, because you typically won't ever see the user interface. Most people never log into a server. Doesn't matter, Windows Server, Mac, they don't ever log into it. They may pull a file down off of it, right? But for example, in this case, quick, what operating system is this running off of? Don't know, do you? Doesn't matter. Am I logged into that? No, I'm just using services. And I will tell you the answer. This is running Linux. Okay, this little guy right here. Okay, so yes, I don't have to log into Linux. I don't have to see Linux in order to be able to use Linux. Okay, let's continue. And then, of course, the bottom is the mobile space, which is where a lot of people are spending their time. Android, it's been out there. Android is big, very big. There's more Android devices than Apple devices out there. Apple iOS, fantastic, but it's proprietary, and so you have to go through a great deal of pain and anguish to get an application put together. It has to go through a lengthy review process and all that. If you're an application writer, and so you're trying to write apps for mobile, Android is fantastic because it's the wild, wild west. You can do anything you want, and the Android people, Google, have basically said, look, if you write an application that completely replaces a fundamental part of our operating system, that's perfectly okay. And everybody went, say that again? It says, we're not going to censor you. We're not going to tell you what applications you can and cannot write. If you want to, for example, the dialer, because most of these are phones, right? If you want to replace the phone dialer application in your Android phone with one that you write, go right ahead. Okay, try that on Apple. They're a little bit more strict. Windows is kind of the new guy on the block. There's fewer, so this is kind of in order. They have lots and lots of Google Android devices, followed by Apple, followed by Windows Phone being the least. On the other hand, there's more Apple applications, followed by Google, followed by Windows. Okay. So, believe it or not, we have reached the end. So, let's go through the summary really quickly on page 403. So, functions common to most operating systems. Yeah, I think we covered that. A variety of desktop operating systems, server operating system, and mobile operating systems. Yep, that's what we covered. Okay, that's the end. I guess we'll see you guys again in some future chapter.